Okay, so we're going to talk about hematopoiesis, we just touched on in the previous video. So you need to remember a name called pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells. So that's a progenitor cell or stem cell which is going to lead into production of all different types of blood cells within our blood. So from this cells, there will be two main lineage or two main stem cells produced from this particular stem cells. So the first one is called lymphoid stem cell, and this lineage is called lymphoid lineage. The next one is called myeloid stem cell, and this lineage or the pathways are called as myeloid lineage. So basically, pluripotent hematopoietic stem cell is differentiating into two major stem cells. One is a lymphoid stem cell, and the other one is myeloid stem cells. This lymphoid stem cells is further differentiating into T cell progenitor and B cell progenitors. T cell progenitors will go to thymus, that's a small gland around your throat, and they will get matured and produced, differentiate into proper T lymphocytes. Again, there are different types of T lymphocytes in our blood, but please don't worry about this within this lecture. Then B lymphocytes, they will go to bone marrow and they will get matured into B lymphocytes or B cells. They are the cells during infection will differentiate into plasma cells to produce antibodies, and a small proportion of these cells will become memory cells to remember that particular antigen in order to produce antibodies next time when they encounter the same antigens. So these are the two major cells, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. They are coming from lymphoid lineage and lymphoid stem cells. Then the next major cell, the stem cell we talked about is myeloid stem cells. So that's going to differentiate into so many different types of stem cells. So first, they're going to be differentiating into eosinophil stem cell that will differentiate to form eosinophils. Then basophil stem cells that will differentiate into form basophils. Then monocyte stem cells that will become monoblast and differentiate into monocytes. And when they get into the tissues during infection or any problem, they will become converted into macrophages. Then granulocytes, they will get differentiated into neutrophils. They will become megakaryocyte stem cells. They will get differentiated into megakaryocytes, and they are the parent cells for platelets. The megakaryocytes will produce platelets and release them into the red blood. Then the next one is erythrocyte stem cells that will differentiate into reticulocyte and finally red blood cells and get released into bloods. So this is what briefly is about hematopoiesis. So you need to remember stem cells are the one going to produce all different types of stem cells. So there is one major stem cell that's called pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells. From there, two different types of stem cells going. One is lymphoid stem cell, which will go to produce T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes, and then myeloid stem cells that's going to produce all the remaining types of your white blood cells plus platelets and red blood cells. Okay, there are different cytokines or molecules important for hematopoiesis. The most important one is erythropoietin. They are produced in the kidney cells and they are important for red blood cell formation. Then other molecules are called granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, and that's important for megakaryocytes, eosinophil, neutrophils, monocyte, and red blood cells. The next one is granulocyte colony stimulating factor, and that's important to produce neutrophils, and then macrophage colony stimulating factor that's important for monocytes. So these are really important factors that you need to remember for your final exam. Okay, now we are going to talk about individual cell types and individual characteristics of them and their main functions within our body. Okay, so red blood cells, as we said before, they are also called erythrocytes. So they are concave disc-shaped structure. You can look at them. They will look like a proper disc, but they will have a biconcave structure. On both the sides, they will have a concave structure. It's like a dips on both the sides. So they are around 8 to 12 micron in diameter, and their volume will be around 90 femtoliters. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus, and therefore they can also be called as anucleated cells. and they don't have any mitochondria, but they will carry lots of ADP and ATP for their energy. As I said before, around 4.5 to 6 million cells will be found in every microliter of blood, and about 25 trillion cells in the average human body. If someone got a 5 liter of blood, we have around 25 trillion blood cells, red blood cells in our body. And as we discussed before, there will be a slight variations between males and females. And these cells have a long lifespan in the blood, and they will survive up to around 4 months, around 120 days. Okay, so these are the basic characteristics about red blood cells. So what is the main function of red blood cells? We talked about this before again. They mainly carry oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. From lungs, it will carry oxygen and go and deliver the oxygen to the tissues and cells around the body, and then collect the carbon dioxide from tissues and cells and take it to lungs in order to exhale. And they play critical role in the respiration by carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide. So when we talk about red blood cells, we must talk about a protein called hemoglobin. Okay, hemoglobin is the protein that's giving red appearance for red blood cells, and that's a protein is going to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body, around the body. So you need to really remember some basic characteristics about this hemoglobin. Around 250 million molecules, hemoglobin molecules, are present in every single red blood cells. So red blood cell is a tiny one we just talked about. It's around 8 to 12 micron in size. But each red blood cell is carrying 250 million molecules of hemoglobin on them. OK, so that's why it's showing really bright red color. So now each hemoglobin has 4 polypeptide chains, which means 4 protein chains. You can see here 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains. They all join together. OK, and they form complete hemoglobin. So each hemoglobin has 4 polypeptide chains, 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. Now, each chain, each polypeptide chain has got a heme group in the middle. OK, and this heme group in the middle will have iron or ferron. OK, so heme group is surrounded with the iron in the center. So the whole heme group is presented in each polypeptide chain. 4 polypeptide chains is making 1 hemoglobin molecule, and around 250 hemoglobin molecules are present on red blood cells. So you can see here the 1 billion heme group on every single hemoglobin. Yeah, sorry, why every single red blood cells? Because each hemoglobin is carrying 4 chains, which means 4 heme groups. Yeah, so therefore they can carry 1 billion oxygen molecules, or they are carrying 1 billion iron molecules on them. So each ion will bind to 1 oxygen molecule. Therefore, they can carry 1 billion oxygen molecules per red blood cells. So they cooperatively bind to oxygen and release cooperatively as well. It's a sort of covalent binding. And it can also bind to carbon dioxide. It can also bind to nitric oxide, and it can also bind to carbon monoxide. And this can be transported around the body. So these are the basic characteristics about hemoglobin. OK, an important protein that's present on the surface of red blood cells. OK, so we said iron is really important because iron is sitting in the heme group of every single polypeptide chain of hemoglobin. If you don't have enough iron, then we will become anemic. Why? Because the red blood cells cannot be produced. Even if the cells are produced, there won't be many hemoglobin molecules. That's why we must take iron in our diet regularly. And if you are not eating proper iron-rich diet, then we need to take the supplements, iron supplements. OK, what's happening when you are eating diets with iron? So this iron in the diet is getting into the gut. So in the gut, it's getting metabolized in the small intestine and it will get absorbed. OK, so you're eating the food is getting broken down or metabolized, and then the iron is getting absorbed from the intestine, particularly in the small intestine, and entering into the blood. Okay, so in the blood, iron cannot transport on its own. So it will bind to a protein called transferrin. This protein will carry iron from one place to another place within the blood. So now this iron will go to bone marrow. We know the bone marrow, or the bone marrow is the primary production site for blood cells. So in here, the iron will be utilized to produce the red blood cells. Now as red blood cells, it will come back to the blood. Okay, now here in the blood, it will carry oxygen. It will go and deliver to all the cells and tissues in the body. Then it will collect carbon dioxide from the cells and tissues and bring it back to the blood. Okay, then it will go to lungs in order to exchange the oxygen and carbon dioxide. So that's the main function as part of red blood cells. And then next, when they get really old, all the red blood cells will go to spleen, and spleen is the major organ that's getting rid of all the expired or old blood cells. Okay, it's acting as a blood filter. Again, we will talk about that later on. So all the red blood cells will get destroyed in the spleen. So when it's destroying, it's breaking down all the hemoglobin as well. So as a byproduct from hemoglobin breakdown, bilirubin and metabolites will be formed. Okay, that will again come back to blood. From here, the bilirubin will go to liver, and the liver will utilize the bilirubin to produce bile. The bile is important for digestion of lipids, so therefore the bile will be secreted back to the intestine. So that's why the bile will be utilized for lipid digestion. And after that, the bile will be excreted. And similarly, some bile will be stored here and some iron will be stored in ferritin within the liver as well. After that, some bilirubin will come back to blood and that will get excreted through kidney. So the bilirubin can be excreted through feces and also urine. You need to remember that. So this is sort of like iron metabolism and the cycle. So iron is coming through the diet, getting absorbed in the small intestine, going to the blood, then going to the bone marrow. Red blood cells are produced using that iron, coming back to blood. It's doing the respiration or oxygen transport, carbon dioxide transport. When they get old, they will go to spleen, they will get destroyed. And when they get destroyed, bilirubin is produced. Bilirubin will go to liver and some bilirubin will go to kidney. Within the liver, the bilirubin will be converted into bile, and the bile will be secreted into the small intestine to digest lipid particles in our diet and then excreted from there. Similarly, the bilirubin coming into kidneys will be excreted through urine. So this is sort of iron metabolism. This is what is happening, and that's why iron in our diet is really, really important. If you don't eat iron-rich food, then you will become anemic. Therefore, you need to start to take iron supplement, but seek the advice from your GP. Okay, how the gas exchange is happening within the lungs. Okay, so we know the lung structure. So we have two lungs in our chest area, and there's a trachea, that's our breathing tube. Okay, so you're breathing in through the nose and then it will go to the back of the mouth and it will go to the trachea. Then it will go into bronchi, that's sort of main branches within the lungs. And finally, these branches will be branching out into tiny little tubes, minute tubes similar to blood capillaries, and they are called bronchioles. Okay, so finally, at the end of the bronchioles, you will see a bunches of cells or small structures called alveoli. It will look like grapes. It will absolutely look like grape bunches. So each one of these bunch or each one of this bulb is alveoli. Okay, alveolus. It's a air sac. It creates like a tiny little balloon. Okay, that's a structure. And all of these alveoli are strongly connected with blood capillaries. The blood capillaries means tiny little blood vessels, not the main branches. Okay, the branches will be further branched into small tubes, and then finally it will become fine, thin capillaries. The fine, thin capillaries are absolutely important because that's what the capillaries will be promoting the diffusion of molecules. For example, gas exchange will happen based on here, and also similarly small molecules, for example, glucose, amino acids will also get diffused into the cells or diffused out from the cells. So this is really important. So the alveolus are acting as a functional units of lungs, and that's where the gases are going to be exchanged, and all the alveoli are interconnected strongly with the blood capillaries. So here, based on the oxygen density and the carbon dioxide density, simple diffusion of the gases will occur. For example, when you breathe in, this air will have more oxygen. Okay, and then the blood collected from the tissues will have less oxygen, more carbon dioxide. So this more oxygen in the inhaled air will get into the blood, and then the more carbon dioxide in the blood collected from the tissues will get exhaled. Because when you breathe in, you got more oxygen, less carbon dioxide. So there's a simple concentration based gradient is happening, and that's what is facilitating the gas exchange within the alveoli. And this is how the gas is being transported. As a simple diagram, you're inspiring air that's going into alveoli. It's getting dissolved in the plasma around the capillary, I told you, and then it will bind to hemoglobin, and then it will go to the target tissues, and then it will get dissolved again in plasma, get into the interstitial full fluid around the tissues, then go inside the cell and get utilized. Oxygen will be consumed. Similarly, carbon dioxide will be produced in the cells, and then it will go back. So I'll show you in this slide. So how the carbon dioxide is being transported back to lungs from your tissues. So tissues after oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide will be produced as a byproduct during metabolism. This carbon dioxide will come to interstitial space. That's basically space between the cells. Then finally it will diffuse into blood capillaries. Okay, as I showed you before, because of the simple gradient based diffusion here. So when carbon dioxide comes here, it will go to the surface of red blood cells. A small proportion of carbon dioxide will straight away bind to hemoglobin. Okay, because that's a protein which can bind to oxygen and also carbon dioxide. But remaining part of carbon dioxide will react with oxygen and it will produce a high carbonic acid, and after that it will release a hydrogen molecule and then produce bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is an important buffer, and that's important to maintain the pH of the blood. Okay, so this is how bicarbonate is produced on the surface of red blood cells. Now bicarbonate will be released into the plasma and it will be circulating. So when it go to the lungs, again the bicarbonate will react back to this hydrogen ion, and then it will form carbonic acid, release the water, and release all the carbon dioxide. Okay, and then this carbon dioxide will go to the alveoli space, and then it will go to the lungs and then exhaled out. Okay, so you need to remember here the carbon dioxide is being transported by red blood cells in two different methods. One, directly they will bind to hemoglobin and it will go to lungs and get out. Okay, get exhaled. And the other way is it to convert the carbon dioxide into bicarbonate, and the bicarbonate will also circulate in the blood. When it comes to lung, it will react back again to produce carbonic acid, release the water molecules, and then convert it to carbon dioxide and exhaled out. So this is how the air is being transported across the body, both oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you need to really remember this gas exchange properly, because you are likely to get the long answer questions, 20 mark questions from this part. So try to go through this mostly. Okay, finally, what are the pathological conditions associated with the red blood cells? It's really important that you understand the pathological conditions associated with the red cells. The most important pathological conditions that many people suffer is called anemia. Anemia means either it's a reduced number of red blood cells, or even if you got enough number of cells, reduced number of hemoglobin will cause anemia. Okay, it's either one of these. So most often it's a reduced number of red blood cells. So it's basically reduced hemoglobin concentration in the blood. There are so many different types of anemia, which we are not going to talk about in this lecture, because this is mainly to cover the basics. So when the red blood cells level is going down, the hematocrit will go down. Hematocrit we talked about before. It's a percentage of packed red cell volume after centrifugation. And then the red cells will also look like smaller in size, and their shapes will also change, or sizes will change. It's really important. Here you can see in the normal red blood cells, they are nice biconcave disc shaped cells, and they carry 250 molecules of hemoglobin on the surface. But here in anemic blood, you can see very few red blood cells, because the red blood cell count has gone down, and they do carry very few hemoglobin molecule on the surface. Okay, what are the most common causes for anemia? So the obvious one will be the poor diet, iron deficiency diet. Okay, so if you don't take iron-rich diet regularly, then there will be iron deficiency, and if you don't take supplement, and the prolonged iron deficiency will lead to anemia. It's really important. The next cause is chronic blood loss. If you get a major accident, trauma, or major injury, if you are losing quite a lot of blood, then we will lose all the red cells and the hemoglobin, obviously. That's when we need blood transfusion. Then malabsorption of iron. Some people, even if they eat iron-rich food, they won't be able to absorb the iron. It's really important. And pregnancy. During pregnancy, the blood is getting diluted because of the growing fetus. And during this time, the women will also get iron deficiency, and that will lead to anemia. Okay, what are the main signs and the symptoms of anemia? So you will feel fatigue, paler, and it will lead to tachycardia. And inflammation on the tongue. The tongue will become like a bluish color. The blood will become like a bluish color, and therefore the skin will look pale because there's a lack of enough red cells or enough hemoglobin carrying oxygen. That's why we are losing that bright red color. And dysphagia, that's a painful swallowing. We will get this problem as well. Okay, so that's reduced level of red blood cells or reduced level of hemoglobin. Okay, next one is what will happen if you got increased amount of red blood cells? This condition is called polycythemia, which means increased level of red blood cells. So it's caused by elevated level of red blood cells. It's abnormally increased production in the bone marrow. For some reasons, if bone marrow got some problems, then they're going to continuously produce lots of abnormal the level of red blood cells. And it can show increased hematocrit. Again, that's a percentage of packed red cell volume that will go up. Obviously, the hemoglobin level will also go up. And the hematocrit here will be more than 48% in women and more than 52% in men. Okay, so you need to understand that the hemoglobin level will be more than 16.5 gram per deciliter in women and 18.5 gram per deciliter in men. Okay, what are the most common causes for producing more cythemia? There could be lots of various diseases, particularly in the bone marrow, and that can lead to the problem. For example, tumors in kidney. If you got tumors in kidney and the liver, that will produce more erythropoietin. So erythropoietin, we said it's an important cytokine that's going to regulate the production of red blood cells. Okay, so that's important. So that's if the level of erythropoietin is going up, then obviously red blood cell will go up. And due to inherited problems, some people may have inherited problem. And then due to hypoxia, chronic hypoxia. So if tissues are not getting sufficient amount of oxygen, the body will think that we need more blood cells in order to supply more oxygen. Therefore, more red blood cells will be produced. So what are the signs and symptoms again here? It will be fatigue and weakness. Even though we have more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, the tissues are not getting sufficient amount of oxygen and other nutrients. Therefore, it's a big problem. And then the headache, we will get a lot of headache because the blood supply will get affected. Then we will get itching, bruising in the body everywhere, particularly in the skin region. If you got lots and lots of cells, they will start to aggregate here and there, particularly for platelets, and they will make some itching and bruising in particular problems. So these are the problems caused by polycythemia, which is increased level of blood. Okay, we will talk about the white blood cells and platelets in the next video. Thank you.